Welcome to the Thresholds of Reality, the podcast where we explore unexplained and mysterious events, phenomena, and legends. Today I am joined by researcher and occultist Aaman Lamba. He's authored several books regarding medieval magic, ancient magic, and he's also a poet. And he's going to share his thoughts, his experience researching these materials and translating. And we'll get to look at some of the diagrams and text from the books themselves. So strap in as we explore the edges of the unknown. Aaman, thank you so much for joining us today. I personally have a bit of a fascination with ancient texts and kind of ancient diagrams, hieroglyphics, that kind of thing. It's actually part of my religion. I'm a member of the Mormon faith, and ancient texts, ancient glyphs, all these kinds of things have been part of our religion for a long time, over 100 years. And it's always fascinated me, not only the translation process, but also how you find these texts to begin with.
Right. Absolutely. And yeah, go ahead. Sir.
Yeah. So maybe you can walk me through how you got a hold of the Grand Grimoire that is the subject of the Complete Illustrated Grand Grimoire text that we'll be basically focusing on today.
Absolutely. And thank you for having me on. And it's always very good to share and talk about, these texts and really how they're really part of a larger kind of revival, right, of interest in these topics, and actually a much more widely dispersed attention than in the past, right? There was, of course, a lot of focus on these in the late, Victorian period, and then, even in the United States. And in fact, as you're probably well aware, even during the birth of the revivalist movements and the Mormon Church itself, a study of these texts as they came over from Europe and really looking back at the origins and in Greece and Egypt and so on, right? So I've generally, and again, from my perspective, it is no different than any other text, right? And in fact, I would consider myself a kind of Gnostic polytheist, right? So for me, all texts are of equal value and are descriptions of a larger, whole, a larger ecosystem, right, as it were. And they're forms of interpreting, the world, right, and getting value out of our actions. And if you really look at the history of what people consider magic or so on, right? In the, in, so to speak, what I might call the good old days, right? Although there wasn't all that much good about it, there wasn't really a distinction between these, right? There was one kind of unified, one might call it a holy science, right? If I had to pick a term, but it wasn't distinct, right? Science, religion, mathematics, or magic and occultism weren't distinct. These were ways of understanding the world and experimenting and engaging with the world. As time went by, of course, they kind of followed their own paths, but the principles underlying all three are still kind of very much the same. I like to say in religion, you kind of hope you're going to get something, right? And you put your faith in that. In science, you don't know what you're going to get, and that's great because you actually want to see what you're going to get. You're going to experiment and try the results out. And in magic, you actually are open to whatever you get, right? There's no wrong answers. The wrong answers are part of a larger whole, a hermetic whole, if one might use that term. And so following that approach, I personally have always been on a quest to learn more and discover more. My readings, have been very diverse, and beginning with, if I really put into a structure of, the magical tradition, the real focus has been, I'd say, starting with what we call the Greco-Roman text, and even a bit earlier, the Egyptian. Although, to be very honest, I can't read the Egyptian text, but I have some familiarity with the concepts. But the Greco-Roman texts for us have actually been the basis at least in the Western tradition or the Western esoteric tradition, of influencing a lot of knowledge and research and so on, right? And even if you look at the Bible in itself, we well know now that the larger corpus across biblical text is much larger than what one considers in the, say to speak, the King James or the modern or the NIV or what have you, right? And all of those texts do seem to be telling a kind of somewhat of a consistent story. But if we look outside that realm, if you look in the Asian tradition, they have somewhat of a different story coming from their background. In the southern cultures, it's very different. But there is a kind of unification, at least in the northern traditions, if I might use that very, very broad term, right? And it's probably very inaccurate. But looking at that thesis, right? The Greco-Roman and the Hermetic and the what we may call the thing. There was, again, the unfortunate term used, Dark Ages, but it was never really dark. Research and study continued in various forms, right? And it was somewhat privileged. Now, what happened in the 15th, 16th century is there was a significant resurgence, right, of interest and following in these texts, and people started rediscovering them. People started making their interpretations, and it was passed around, by hand to hand, as well as with the rise of the printing press. There was a huge explosion in access to these texts. Unfortunately, as we know, it also coincided with a great amount of pushback and suppression and the burning times, as we call them, where even possession of many of these books was considered an offense, worthy of being burned, right? So the Grand Grimoire is part of this tradition, right? It's what one calls a foundational magic text, and it can be very definitely dated back to about 1805 or so. But really, some of the research shows it should be. There are procedures and what one might call spirits in it that date back to at least the 1500s, right? In various forms. And some of my recent or subsequent work actually does trace back that. The Grand Grimoire, as it's called, right? And your audience might not be entirely familiar with such terms. The word grand per se is, of course, a marketing term that was used more to promote its significance. It was typically considered a forbidden text and definitely what one might call heretical. And there was a lot of course, misinterpretation, because nobody had ever really read the book, right? Like as usual, that it involved selling your soul to the devil and all these things, right? And there were various kind of somewhat poor translations of it that have existed since about the Victorian period, but I was not satisfied with them. And as part of my research, we did find, that the original text, fortunately for us, have been preserved in manuscript form in certain libraries, right? There's the Wellcome Collection in England, there's the Bibliothèque Nationale Française in France, and others. I have an educational background I've studied French, all through school and college. I like learning languages. I'm right now at my, I think, 800 score in Duolingo. So, keep learning new things. Right now I'm focusing on Latin and a few others. But I was based on research, we found, the original, if one can call it that, right? And it's a very poor term again, French manuscripts for the Grand Grimoire, right, in the Bibliothèque Nationale. So I started, going through them and kind of translating it. And really very quickly, actually, right at the beginning, I discovered that it was not as the way it's been portrayed, right? It involved, a kind of very rigorous celibacy and formal and good nature. And as my favorite part is, when I really finish the translation, it ends with a little paragraph, and I'll turn to that in a bit. That basically said, now that you know this, the most important thing you need to do is be charitable to your fellow man, and not and I will help you. I will give you, a lot of the practices in the Grand Grimoire are about getting material wealth, and those are promised to you, but only if you are charitable to your fellow man. Only if you give, so to speak, the first gold coin or whatever you earn in the month as charity. And the actual operation per se in the text distinctly warns the operator not to surrender one's soul. It literally says, you're going to call up spirits that ask for the moon. I mean, literally for the soul. You've got to not surrender soul. You've got to realize it's worth more than just giving it up for material wealth. You've got to hold back. You've got to say, I'm doing this in the pursuit of a higher cause, in the pursuit of knowledge, and I will not, you won't get what you're asking for, but if you're willing to work for me, unfortunately, it also involves the so to speak, the punishing of the spirits, which I don't quite agree with. And my interactions with spirits, I've never done that. But if you don't follow this, I'm going to kind of punish you in with a putting a wand in the fire and stuff. So I don't like to hurt anyone, so I wouldn't do that. But yeah, I've been fortunate. I was able to do that. Now, here's what's interesting. In the text, while researching it, I also found a novel that had been written or published around the same time under the same name, right? And the plot of the novel is very different. It involves a young man who's trying to, kind of impress his love, and he falls in with this, wizened old kind of sorcerer who's everyone's afraid of. And the sorcerer has a copy of this book, and basically the sorcerer tends to carry out these, so to speak, pseudo scientific operations to impress people, right? And thunder and lightning and smoke and mirrors. And in the course of the novel, it's really more from a scientific temperament. It pushes the message that science supplements or overrides these pseudo scientific processes, and if you really put your faith in science, you're going to be better off. And it also has a side conversation on spiritualism and stuff. But it was very interesting to find this other novel. So my edition, which I call the Complete Illustrated Grand Grimoire, actually has both, right? The original manuscript, which I published in parallel corpora format. So they've got the original French and the English, and then the novel with some great images that we did. Some of which are from the original text, some of which we actually did, afresh for the book.
Well, okay, so you said a lot of things that I kind of want to touch on a little bit at a time. So the Grand Grimoire instruction manual, you said the point of it was don't surrender your soul, don't give in to evil, be charitable, be good, basically. Mm-hmm. And that kind of goes contrary to a lot of popular imagery regarding people who use magic, that they're either making contracts with devils and subjecting themselves or subjugating themselves to mm-hmm. devils. And that has always seemed to me like a really, like, you ought to have a trial period. At least when you buy Indeed. A car, you get 3 days to rethink it, right? So
Indeed. So if you look at the process, right? You summon. I mean, there's as I mentioned, a bunch of preparation you do, but getting past that, and it's really modern in the sense that the operation is described twice. Once is the extremely formal method. You need to get a certain kind of branch from a hazel tree plucked at a certain time. You need to get the skin. And an example of poor translation, it has get the skin of a kid goat, right? And in French, that's chevaux. And every single translation, and in fact, half the horror, so to speak, this book has had, is people have been translating that as the word kid, as child. But it isn't a child. Skinning a goat is no big deal even today. And back then, it absolutely wasn't a big deal, right? And so, that's the kind of misinterpretation that one finds. But coming to the operation, you summon the spirit. In this case, you typically summon, in best protocol, the boss, right? Lucifuge, which fundamentally actually just means one who flees from the light, right? It was one of the 6 categories of daemones, and again, the word demon horribly misinterpreted, but spirits, right? That is referenced by Michael Sellis and Paracelsus a little earlier, but fundamentally the lowest form, Lucifuge or Lucifuges, are those who flee from the light. But you summon Lucifuge, and Lucifuges kind of subordinates, and the cover of the book actually has Lucifuge depicting very, very visually that if you summon, and you're going to get money, but don't be attached to the wealth, right? So this is the classic French image of the jester or the fool wearing a crown and turning money onto the ground. That in itself tells us there's more to life than wealth, right? But you summon him and you make it, you kind of once you've got your message across, Lucy Fuge in that thing says, I'll show you the treasure and I'll show you the means to the treasure, and then I'll make a deal with you that you can call me or my subordinates at 1 hour in a week, or certain whatever, right, based on my calendar being available, make an appointment and I'll see you, and I will teach you, the so to speak, the ways of the world, right? But that's all it is. And then he gives you the mechanics and the seals and stuff, and certain techniques, and that's about it. He does say, hey, why don't you give me your soul, but it repeatedly says, don't surrender your soul.
So you have the instruction manual, and then it's kind of partner novel. It reminds me of books like He's Just Not That Into You, where it's kind of an instruction manual about dating, but then there's a movie that kind of illustrates those examples. Is that kind of how it works?
Well, they come from very different backgrounds. The instruction manual, as it were, was an operative manual being used by Karsis or sorcerers of the period. Typically, they were more educated, but the fact that they could read back then, they were more educated. Many of them came from a liturgical or clerical background, right? Or they had access to education and books and all the tools of the trade. They were not, so to speak, cunning folk, as you find in the British magical tradition, working with kind of herbal artifacts and stuff. They were more the ceremonial magicians. The novel comes from a completely different tradition. It comes from the popular French literature genre, romance, action, drama, emotion, good guys, bad guys. So it's very different. But the author of the novel was, of course, conversant with it and brought that context in, right? And we should remember that a lot of this was very familiar to people, right? While I was doing my research for this novel and the translation in the Bibliothèque Nationale, I found a newspaper clipping from 1922, right, where they were criticizing a certain French senator for making a deal with the German, the post World War I German government to kind of let them off from some of their debts, right? And it literally says this guy is making a deal with Sargatanas, who's one of the 27 spirits in the Grand Grimoire. So the principal concept, yes, perfect. You see that there. Thank you. The Senator Marquis has just signed a pact with the demon Sargatanas. So put this in a newspaper is evident that they expected their readers would relate to the concepts being discussed.
Yeah, that's absolutely fascinating. But you kind of skip through one little phrase, your own interactions with spirits, and that kind of leads me to my next big topic, which is, how did you get involved with the study of magic?
Sure. Thank you. Great question, right? Again, if I look at my cultural and my intellectual tradition, it has never been, I have not had a time where the more than human was not part of my frame of reference, right? I come from, a Hindu/Buddhist kind of background, and the universe of everything has life. Every object, and everyone is striving, so to speak, to work and be part of a larger ecosystem, right? The ecosystem or ecology of the multiverse, as it were, has always been commonplace to me. That being said, I did start experimenting with some of the, so to speak, formal magical techniques really as early as I think when I was a teenager. I think I summoned up the wind and had a bit of a thunderstorm. But then in my more formal magical practice, I think over the last 5 to 10 years, there's been some very good experiences. I try to, I have fairly active, as you can see back behind me, I have Santa Muerte, who's the, Lady Death, as it were, from the Mexican tradition. Really value her. I've had some visions of her. I'll post a couple of links. Like, I was driving down in Indiana just before COVID, right? And had a full apparition vision driving down the road of her in the heartland. And the message I got, and I didn't believe it, right? I mean, I'm human. I mean, fortunately, I didn't decide to stop in the middle of the highway and start checking it out. But I got this message that, me and mine, fortunately so far, would be safe through what was to come. And at that moment, we didn't even know what was to come, right? Um, the What I do tend to do or try to do is a kind of a daily ritual practice, which really involves beginning with thanking and acknowledging my ancestors, and a spirit form I call the agathos daimon, which dates back to the Greek tradition, the higher entity that effectively we all are part of. And then I kind of actually walk the worlds. I kind of acknowledge each of the planetary spirits, and I work with some more specific spirits. I have many altars, as you can see, that have a whole variety of things on them, right? I mean, I have Chinese, I have the archangels, I have many other spirits, right? And in fact, that painting there is by my lovely wife Deepthi Lamba, who's an artist. That's an angel, right? And so I I have other more formal operations, right? We're having a thunderstorm now, and my mind has been going to Baal, the ancient, storm god, very much a good friend with the Trinity that existed at that time: Baal, Yahweh, and Asherah. Right? They were kind of three, they were hanging out together. They were almost like good buddies, and Baal was almost displaced, and my good friend and linguist Baal Kedmon, again no connection, right? He uses that pseudonym, has proved quite exhaustively that in many places the word was reduced, right? He was demoted and brought down to negative form, similar to how the Christian tradition took a many ancient gods, so to speak, and denigrated them to make them demons and evil god spirits, but in principle they were gods of those regions. So for me, I don't see these as good or evil. These are spirits or deities one can engage with and bring into one's life, right, for practical application and value, but at the same time keeping oneself focused on a higher, how do I say, outcome, power, objective. Not one. At least I don't believe in stepping down or looking to make evil actions. I'm sure people do, but I don't.
So your studies have kind of become part of your daily life,
Mm-hmm.
as incorporating them
Yes.
into kind of a ritual and a spiritual practice.
Yes, I won't say again. Everyday life tends to override that part, but I do try to keep it as part of this. There's so much to learn, right? And we live in this wonderful point in time where we have access to pretty much the world's information. So I've, so to speak, taught myself, the nitty gritty of astrology and applying that to daily life, the nitty gritty of meditation and some forms of Kabbalah and some forms of engagement, and even something as simple as, for example, I'm wearing a bunch of beads, right? Each of these has a meaning, and this is a different dimensions or protection or intention or creativity, right? I believe in retro causation. For example, I am probably going to do something after this interview that is making what we are doing more positive. Uh, you know, in a way, doing something in the future that draws the events we are going through now to a better positive end state, as opposed to doing something that would draw it downwards. I believe that helps because we influence at this moment. This moment, as Buddhism says it, contains the past, present, and future. And so by changing my perception of the past, as it were, I change my future, or by making actions in the future, I make this a better present. That's how I believe.
That is tough to juggle in my mind.
Mm-hmm.
That future me is going to make this moment better. Um,
Sure, sure.
but
It, it, it,
I appreciate that.
yes,
I've watched enough episodes of Star Trek to get the concept.
yeah, yeah. Dr. Phil Stutz, great show on Netflix with Seth Rogen. He's the kind of psychiatrist who kind of works with Seth Rogen. He's got a book called The Tools, right? So this is coming out of psychology. But when I read The Tools, every one of the tools was, in effect, a magical practice. It involved putting love into the world directed at the individual you're working with, right? It involved looking at you on your deathbed, looking back at you in this present moment, and kind of asking you, are you doing? I mean, are you sure you want to do this right now? Because when you're on your deathbed, you're going to look back at this moment and figure out that, and that's psychology, right? To the best of my knowledge, he's not, a practicing occultist, but every one of those tools was a magical, so to speak, practice.
That's fascinating that they're
Hmm.
kind of linking up in different ways.
Indeed.
Now, as far as your linguistic abilities or the requirements of your linguistic abilities, when you're looking at diagrams like this one, where are these different sort of glyphs and characters coming from?
Great question, right? So if you look at this is a combination of a few things. And again, like everything it has many layers of interpretation, right? There is of course the north, south, east, west, which we may relate to, but that's actually putting us in the context of a spirit of the east, spirit of the north. The symbols themselves are a mix of certain what have been called magical alphabets. Some of these are what are called Theban alphabets. The one on the Sperian may also be, and I'll have to go back and check, may also be part of what's called the Enochian, language that John Dee used. So these are alphabets that way. And now the names themselves, the spirit names Betherion, Teltron, are almost certainly, naming higher spirits. I'll have to go into my research again, but Agrippa does have a section where, in the three books of occult philosophy, the latest and best translation is on Inner Traditions, but does show that the words ending in ION are the higher spirits, right? Either and so those are definitely higher spirits. Now, but the symbols themselves are what are called the Theban alphabets. I can't read them. I mean, I'd admit it, but I can recognize their intention.
Okay, so maybe explain that a little more. Not only how you understand the intention, but also what they're trying to convey.
If I put it one way, right? These are it's a very tough way to. I'm thinking of a way to explain it that doesn't get into more like explaining science using like science, right? But the Theban alphabet is a kind of cipher, right? It's an early writing system that used. I believe Trithemius was the first to reference it in his Polygraphia, and a lot of these people are kind of correlated, right? In fact, Trithemius and one of his interlocutors, Pietro de Abano, Peter de Abano, who wrote the very, very famous Heptameron, one translation of which is in one of my upcoming books and is very well researched by Dr. Joseph Peterson, is a form of magical writing, as it were, right? And then Agrippa uses it or references it in the occult philosophy, right? And that's where I am familiar with it. It also appears in Liber Iuratus, which is one of the earliest grimoires, also known as the Swan Book of Honorius. Most people do believe it's a kind of runic alphabet. As you can see, they do look like the runes, right? So these are, I would not be able to say whether it's a distortion or a kind of, reinterpretation of the runes, but, the Polygraphia does have this with mappings, right? So some of these, I'd have to go and look, but almost each one of these can be mapped to an alphabet, an English letter.
Yeah, I'm noticing there's some characters like in the east. In the east, you see kind of an X with a line through it. In the north, there's an X without a line through it.
Yeah.
In the south, there's an
right.
H
I'm going to. Indeed. So I'm just going to note, no, they are haphazard. I'm going to note a lot of this does get distorted as it comes through, different recensions. Not everything is part of the Theban alphabet. I want to be careful to say that, right? Some of these are probably sigils. So they're kind of really creatively written, or the spirits have communicated it to whoever defined this. Both are equally possible. They're intended to. The way you typically do this is you almost visualize this, in your mind's eye, and you kind of visualize light activating this whole image, and you read out the relevant prayer. As you can see, it's under a hierarchy, right? And typically you invoke certain spirits under a hierarchy. So, but it's not very readable. It's not intended to be. It's also creative license in terms of images.
Okay. Well, I mean, anytime I see this type of uh, graphic or
Mm-hmm.
glyph or codex, maybe even, I'm instantly curious.
Yes,
What
I
could it
yeah,
possibly mean, right? And then
I find this
especially,
interesting myself.
and yeah, and then
Yeah.
especially the figure in the middle, which is, to me, it's indecipherable,
Mm-hmm.
and obviously being in the center, it's got to be the most important part of this whole diagram.
Yes, it is intended to represent the specific spirit you are invoking, right? In If you look at, if you bring my book up, if you have the image, if you bring up any of the seals, right, uh, you'll actually see there is this imagery is coming from. If you look at person, right? I don't know if you have this here. Um, so we have the image of person from one of the original texts, and you have person. Now it actually looks like this guy blowing a horn. The image in the center is somewhat of an image, right? And again, this might be hard for many people to believe. I would assume the person who originally came up with the spirit had an encounter with the spirit, right? That represented or manifested in this form, either in the mind's eye or in extremely rare cases to full physical manifestation. And he tried to capture the best he or she could. Unfortunately for us, most of this was male dominated at the time, but is probably representing the image on the right.
That's awesome. That's so cool.
Yeah, yeah. So that's how it is, right? It goes through various forms, and then it does get distorted as it goes, right? Guzoin is a camel. Now, I'd propose the seal of Guzoin is very camel-like, right? I mean, in some form,
I,
or it's really a dromedary, I
I mean,
guess.
I'm gonna have to
Yeah.
defer to you. My imagination is pretty limited as I'm
Sure.
looking at the
Yeah.
figure.
Right. No, it's not always that, but it's hard to say how these images come about. They work. They work, and so one does use them.
What do you mean they work? How do you know
They
they
work in. Oh, well, my personal, as one calls them, experiments have demonstrated an ability to engage with these spirits through these sigils or symbols. Right. I've had people, many people. Right. This is not just one person's experience. Record these, but I mean, speaking purely for myself, I've been able to do, for example, and again, the unfortunately much maligned Lucifer. Right. Comes in many forms in many of these texts, but I have done, for example, a pendulum operation with Lucifer using one of these seals, not from this text, but from another one, and asked questions, right, and got answers. It's almost like a kind of Q&A process uh, that demonstrated a question answer model that was accurate, right? So I mean, that's just one example. I'm probably not going to name a few other or describe a few other examples, but yeah, that they work.
Okay, okay. So the interesting part about that is that well, okay, so do each of these different entities have different properties? Is there a reason why you would summon one versus another?
Absolutely. Just like it's like again in the polytheist tradition, someone once asked like, why are there so many, so to speak, Hindu gods, right? And the example I don't remember who it was gave is consider it like a general post office when you walk in, right? Not your small regional one, but a general post office. There's an individual whose job is stamping, kind of mail. There's another individual who issues money orders, and so on. And the universe is complex enough that individuals there are people who have areas or spheres of responsibility, right? And again, coming from a polytheist tradition, that makes perfect sense, right? And so in that sense, these spirits exactly have those functions. And it's either through trial and error, or research, or ideally and appropriately interrogation or conversation with these spirits, that you get the specific experience, right? It says here, for example, epos, right? And he comes in many different names: epos, epes, eperos, right? Is subordinate to sargatananas, and he's described as prince and count of hell, right? Okay, but he appears in the form of an angel, sometimes under that of a lion, with the head and legs of a goose and the tail of a hare. But it says specifically, he knows the past and future, gives genius and daring to men, and commands 36 legions. Now, if I was looking for an interaction, and by the way, this can also be ignoring these, you could work with the 72 angels of the Shem HaForash, and each of them has a function. You might, I do distinctly remember before I started working this book, working with one of them, and I have to check my notes, but I think it was the 45th, asking for help in framing this book the right way and putting it out and to get the right attention. Similarly, before publishing the book, I explicitly worked with Lucy Fuge, and as you see, it's got Lucy Fuge signature. This is interestingly from a very famous pact that Urbain Grandier in the, I think in the, the 18th century, was arrested and I think tried for making a pact with Lucy Fuge, and he had this document that had this Lucy Fuge, so I reproduced at the back. But I asked for this book to be hugely able to bring these guys back to public attention and engagement, and it seems to have had some positive effect. So yes, I believe they work, and I've had some evidence.
All right, we've got a viewer question. He says, shouldn't we be wary of communicating with Lucifer?
Absolutely. One should be wary of communicating with anyone. One should, in the best tradition, trust, but keep one's own counsel. One should not surrender one's sovereignty at any, in any context, right? I believe one should never surrender one's sovereignty in any spiritual or practical context. So I would absolutely agree, one should be wary, but one should be no more wary than one would be with, say, a wild animal, right? Or another human. One would build trust, and the relationship would tell us if it's worth maintaining. But I agree. But if the question, just interpreting a little broader, is, should we be careful of the way Lucifer has been portrayed, and Lucifer is the big bad guy, and so should we be careful? I would say no different than any other interaction with any other spirit. To me, every individual or every spirit is equally of worthy of respect, and equally a shard of the the larger whole, and striving for goodness. Even if they do evil things, I believe they have Buddha nature in them. Hello, is it frozen?
Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry, I froze a little bit. Just give me a minute.
Yeah.
All right. Am I back?
Yes, it's back.
Sorry, I have poor signal strength right now.
Hello.
All right. So the next question is,
okay, you're back.
Are working against us at all times?
Can't we assume these dark entities? So I'm trying to understand the question. Is it, should we assume that they're working against us, or can't we? Okay, I'm going to interpret it that way, right? Should we assume they're working against us at all times? I don't believe so, right? But then again, the text clearly ask you to be, firstly, ready to do certain operations, right? In magic, there are certain foundational. This is not something I would say everyone can just start doing overnight, right? In principle, one requires a clean mind, a clean spirit. One requires ability to face the darker sides of one's own nature, as well as whatever the spirits may depict at us. One also, and probably this is important, in magic, one begins with learning grounding, right? I also, as I've spoken to some people, I say that the two first things to learn really are glamour and invisibility, right? Both are fairly easy, right, in magical terms, but if you learn glamour and you aren't also able to learn invisibility, which is to say retreat into the background when one needs to, you might actually get into deep trouble. Typically, people get very imbalanced, right? Similarly, coming to working with spirits, one should never assume that the spirits have anything, like they don't, whether it's, I mean, and again, not speaking specifically about what one calls demons or angels. Even the angels don't particularly relate to us in our frame of reference, right? They might have a much larger kind of scheme of things and say, yeah, sure, go do this, right? It might get us into trouble, but there's a grander outcome out there that we in our smaller scheme of things don't realize or don't see. And so one must do what's right, as Aleister Crowley said, do what thou wilt, right? But what you've got to know what your will dictates, right? And follow love. And people almost always forget the second part, right? Love is the law, love under will. So it can't be at least I don't believe in doing something to harm others, but protection is important. So yeah, to answer the question, one should be wary. One should not assume that these spirits have our best interest or anyone's interest at heart.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good advice. There's another picture from the book, another diagram from the book I wanted you to comment on. It's the diagram of squares and triangles on the left here.
Ah, yes. This looks like it's Enochian.
Yeah, tell me about this.
Can you, are you able to scroll up? Or move this up? No, I'm just trying to see the whole page.
Page 174.
No, what book is this? This is not my book, I think. Can you go to this is not mine.
Oh, okay. All right. It was following this page.
No, this is not my book, but.
Oh, okay. Well,
I can comment on it from my little. I haven't. It looks like a, it looks like an astrological chart, or also it looks like, this looks like a set of astrologies, right? But I really can't comment. I haven't seen this text before.
Okay. All right. Well, we'll drop out of that then.
Okay.
Okay. So, how would you advise somebody to approach the Great Grimoire that you've translated?
The Grand Grimoire?
The Grand
Great
Grimoire.
question. So the the way it's written, it's got a fairly exhaustive introduction, right? That's important to read because it puts you in the context of what was happening, where this fits in the grand scheme of things of magic and stuff. Now, in terms of approaching it, the actual operation or the prelude clearly states that don't be presumptuous, don't think you're a know-it-all, right? And it fundamentally says right at the beginning, one can perform these operations and still be true to one's conscience, and that's really where I would begin, right? The operation itself says be humble, right? Engage, that is to say, create a seal of this form, the one that, basically I would take the Lucifuge form seal to begin with. Create space and calm your mind. Make sure you're careful about what you're doing. It is recommended to use a circle. This form of a circle is really, and again, even in Asian tradition, whether it's in Bali or in India, one create circles in terms of for ritual purposes, right? And so this concept of a circle as a form of protection is very important, right? Some people say, yeah, sure, just create a circle in your mind. I might agree in some case, but I wouldn't do that if I was reaching out to the big guys, right? But fundamentally the sequence is fairly straightforward, right? Create a circle, have some form of intention-based tool, a wand, for example, I have one of my wands. I have quite a few. Is a hazel wand. I think a holly wand prepared by Aaron Leach, right? And it's got the seals of the. I think this is from the Key of Solomon inscribed on it. So I use the sea as um, my intention. Is projected through this, right? I also have a knife, but I actually don't use it. Just too painful to hold two things at once and a book. But it begins with a set of prayers, right? A set of prayers to the omnipotent in thanksgiving, putting ourselves under the greater protection of the whole, right? Of whatever one might call the divine. It then is a specific summoning, right? So you kind of have to, it recommends fasting and being free of pollution for 3 days, and all that good stuff. But once you're ready to go, you basically do a sequence of prayers, calling on the gods and the angels and the saints. And this is, again, one must note, in the tradition, in the Protestant slash somewhat evolving Catholic tradition of that 1500s to 1800s, right? It was somewhat fluid, so I won't say it was one or the other, but operating, engaging, and then at a point, I'm willing to agree a bit. And I have one reader who told me he's received treasure, as he called it, 3 times, right, from this book. At a point, you will have an interaction, right? It it might be in your mind's eye, 99% you're going to sense its presence. It could be a bit more specific and vivid. I can't say, because it depends on the individual and maybe the spirit's engagement and so on. And then one does have to verify that you are speaking with the spirit you've invoked. Uh, Once you open this door, anything can come in, right? So you've got to be able to verify. You've got to demonstrate or ask the spirit for evidence, which is in the form of, it's going to give you a name or going to give you an image. And the book does have some of those names and images, but I won't say anyone knows all the seals. And then again, as stressed by the book, keep your sovereignty. So don't give it up, even if your mind says, hey, if you give me all this money, I'll give you my soul, of just because it sounds cool. Don't do it, right? Just don't do it. But ask for whatever you want, and then, extremely important, dismiss the spirit, thank it, and dismiss it with additional prayers, and then just go about your life, right? Just forget about it. You've done your job, and just keep going.
Do you have any words of caution for anybody who might be using
I
this maybe
mhm.
recklessly or carelessly?
Yeah, well, don't. But the number one thing is, if one isn't stable of mind, one isn't grounded, one isn't sensible, one doesn't know what one wants, don't get into this. There are much simpler things one could do, right? And one must do. Like, doing all of this doesn't mean you're just going to sit back and your bills get paid, or you have no longer have to work. All this tends to do is open up new opportunities. Things start falling into place, or you start getting calls, or you become more aware of what you have around you. Sometimes you might get more than that, but even that is, I would say, still say, a blessing, right? To get some value. And then but keep your safety. It does, most of these books recommend not doing it in your kind of in your apartment, but finding a very quiet place and going and doing it in the woods and stuff. In reality, you're not going to be probably able to do that. I haven't faced much issue doing it, at right here. But then again, I have been, so to speak, working on my own grounding and protection for many, many years. So it's not, I I'm able to kind of deal with the surprises that may come.
And grounding and protection, what does that entail?
Uh, Again, prayers, recognition that one is part of a much larger scheme of things, right? And working through a hierarchy, as it were, of authority. And it doesn't have to be, so to speak, Christian or Catholic or Protestant or anything. It doesn't have to be. It could be whatever defines you, right? There's an excellent book. I don't remember the name, but it basically says, first get in touch with your ancestors, even the ones that weren't very good. Get attached to them. They'll help you along the way before you even kind of engage with spirits outside your immediate, how do I say, uh, you know, sphere of engagement. So start with that. There are formal protection models and so on, but I'd recommend more reading than just me saying do this. It's going to work for you. Uh, a good bath is important, and it is recommended in general to do this at when this it's the moon is waxing. If you have positive intentions, highly recommended. In the day and hour of and that's a little more complex. I don't know if we'll have time to get into that, but people probably know every day is specific to a particular planetary spirit. Saturday for Saturn and so on, right? And so if I'm working on prosperity, Thursday is a great day. Thursday is traditionally related to Jupiter. Friday for love, Venus, right? Tuesday for Mars or words of action and Monday for meditation or emotion. And so using the day and, well, the hour is something you can look up. Every, hour also has a corresponding planetary ruler, but just the day would be good to begin with, right? Doing it in the day will give you a little more chance of success. You'll be kind of cooking with gas, although there's more you need to do, more complex. I won't be able to get into that at this stage.
Well, okay then. As we're running out of time, I'd like to invite you to share whether you mentioned you have a couple upcoming projects you want to let people know about.
Sure, thank you, and Sam, thank you so much for having me on. It's been really good. I've loved seeing some of your interviews. Actually, need to finish them. I found the one with the exorcist extremely interesting. Of course, highly respected individual, right? The father who's kind of got that. I think the group globally, but always loving to speak to new people, and I can be found on the much maligned Facebook as if you look for Aaman Lamba, I have an author page. I am still on Twitter, not for much longer, I wonder, but again as Aaman Lamba, AAMANLAMBA. And my books are on Amazon.com, again as Aaman Lamba. I have currently 3 books published: the Complete Illustrated Grand Grimoire. I have the Great French Occult Romances, which is a collection of 4 French novels. Very, very interesting. The cover is, again, by my lovely wife, Deepthi Lamba, who's an amazing artist. And it involves a woman with a red dragon, right? And this collection of poems called the Odontiad. The Odontiad refers to, it originally started as a thought process on tooth decay, which is why Odontiad, but it became about collapse in general. It's a 32 sonnet sequence and a few other poems. I dedicated it to my dentist, and he was really surprised when I handed him a copy. But actually, I dedicated it to my family, my dentist, and the taste of memory, right? Because that's what poetry is, right? You're kind of trying to taste memory. I do have many other works in progress. I have 2 books coming out next year. One is a translation of what is going to be called the magical art of King Solomon, but really the magical art. The foreword is by the late and most wonderful Jake Stratton Kent, who wrote the definitive Encyclopedia Goetica and many other books. He passed earlier this year. Really, really respect and value his scholarship. It would be published on Hadean Press sometime next year. Very hard to tell with publishing schedules. I have another book coming out on another imprint with Hadean Press. It's called the Song of Oberon. Some of your readers might have heard of Oberon, the fairy king. He appears in Midsummer Night's Dream. I was inspired to do this, by my mind goes places, right? I read a footnote about the Song of Oberon in Professor Daniel Harm's Book of Oberon, and I went and found it. And this book is very interesting. It has been translated by U.S. presidents and others, but in bits and pieces. I've actually got the original sources dating back to almost the 13th century, and I'm looking forward to that coming out next year. I do have 1 or 2 other works in process, but probably not yet time to share them. But yeah, that's who I am.
Excellent. There's one more viewer question as we as we get ready to close.
Oh,
he wants to know what your favorite occult themed movie is.
wow, that's a really tough one because I have so many, right? Um, and one is beginning to realize there's so much in every field one finds versions. But I did like A Dark Song. I did like. I mean, I like the Supernatural series for sure, and I really like Bell Book and Candle, one of the earlier ones. I forget when it is, but I think I'd go with those for now. Otherwise, I'd be scratching my head to think of many more. Yeah.
Very good. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. And for our viewers, make sure that you like, comment, and subscribe. And until next time, keep on exploring the edges of the unknown.
Thank you.